data innovations in S4HANA, as well as organizational change lessons in S4HANA implementations. Those are just two of the topics we're going to cover in episode number 8 of the Journey to S4HANA podcast.
Welcome to Journey to S4HANA, the podcast that covers everything related to SAP implementations. This podcast is not affiliated with SAP and covers the realistic truth behind S4HANA, Ariba, and SuccessFactors ERP implementation success. Whether you're new to the world of SAP, an existing ECC, or R3 customer, a multinational team, or a mid-sized organization, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their S4HANA implementations, as well as other ERP implementations. This is Season 1, Episode 8 of Journey to S4HANA. You can find past episodes and upcoming episodes of this podcast at journey2s4hana.com. This podcast is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, which is the company I work for. We help clients with digital strategy, software selection, as well as implementation, not just of S4HANA, but other systems as well. And the show is sponsored by Major Tom Productions. You can learn more about sponsorship opportunities by checking out the contact information I've included in the links below. With me, as always, is our co-host, Darian Fiakuski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited for another episode.
Me too. This should be a great episode. We're going to cover a few different topics today. We're going to get into some audience questions from social media to start the show, and then we're going to get into a newsworthy topic regarding data innovation in S4HANA. And then later in the show, we're going to have two guests. We're going to have Joyce and Sarah Stanley-Smith from the Third Stage Consulting team. They're actually both based in Europe, one in the UK, one in Scotland. And they're going to be on the show joining us to talk about organizational change management lessons in S4HANA implementations. So if you're interested in the human side of S4HANA implementations, this is the episode you want to watch. And we'll have a great conversation with them later in the show. But before we bring Julia and Sarah onto the show, Darian, what kind of questions do you have from the audience, and what sort of newsworthy topics do you have in store for us?
Yeah, so we have kind of a broader, more general question today that really could be applied to any software, but specifically we can relate it to S4HANA SAP here. Do we really need ERP when AI goes enterprise, and how is AI improving ERP software?
Yeah, I actually released a video recently about how AI is improving ERP software and ERP implementations as well. But one of the things I'd say is that, yes, for the time being, I think you do need ERP or enterprise technology, I should say. It doesn't necessarily mean you need one single system like in S4HANA, but you could have multiple systems, and AI allows you to maybe navigate or mitigate some of the risks of having multiple systems. And the reason for that is, ERP was built for transactions. ERP was built to house data, to manage data, to have data flow throughout an end-to-end process, but it wasn't necessarily built to be the most user-friendly or easiest to use technology. And what AI does now is it creates a more positive, but potentially more positive user interface, and easier user interface that can help bridge together different systems. Or even if you're just using S4HANA and you're not tying to any other systems, it just makes it easier potentially to find data within the system. So I think it's generally a positive thing.
Yeah, definitely interesting to see how it will develop in the future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think all the software vendors are talking about it, and be curious to see how AI actually gets adopted by ERP customers.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm excited to dive into today's topic from an article. It is about SAP and the new data innovations in data sphere for SAP. So what this is really about is SAP SE announced new data innovations in SAP data sphere, enhancing enterprise planning with generative AI features for simplified data interaction and landscapes. They aim to empower customers with deeper insights, faster growth, and efficiency in making a data strategic asset. Could you share maybe some insights, Eric, on the importance of AI governance and how it can be effectively implemented in organizations? I know we've kind of touched on this before, but in this specific for DataSphere.
Yeah. I think, if you look at data management in general and AI, that sort of thing, and I know we talked about Jolie AI last week in last week's episode, which you can find at journeyto s4hana.com. Go back to episode 7. You'll find our discussion around Jolie AI within S4HANA. But in general, when you talk about data governance and AI governance, those are two really important topics that don't get a lot of airtime or attention. But they're really important if we want to get the full value of AI, of data, of analytics, predictive analytics, all that stuff. And when you think about governance, the way I view it is how you manage data to make sure that your data stays clean and that you're not corrupting data through human error or just misunderstanding of what a process should be. Just as an example, organizations generally are going to have what they call master data, where it's like your customers, your vendors, your chart of accounts in accounting, some of the things that are relatively static. They do change, but they're not transactional. They're meant to be sort of the data structure for the overall S4HANA implementation. And you need to have pretty tight controls and governance over that master data, because that's sort of how you report. That's how the AI models are going to, that's what the AI models are going to read. That's what predictive analytics are going to rely on to provide useful information to users. So having a clear process and clarity around how people use the system and the change management behind that is super important. And so when I think governance, I tend to go to business processes and people. How do you ensure that you've got people and processes that are aligned and supportive of good data and AI tools? And, we'll certainly talk about the people part of it here later in this episode when we get to our two guests that are going to be on to talk about organizational change management. But those are some of the first things that come to mind.
Yeah, definitely. And also, in your experience personally, how critical is the role of data architecture like Business Data Fabric in achieving scalable and efficient data management?
It's really important. I mean, you've got to have, again, the data or the outputs of your system are only as good as your data. So you've got to have, those tight controls in place and the governance and the cleanliness of data when you first, especially when you move the data over to S4HANA. You want to make sure you're not just pulling all your legacy data that might be dirty without cleaning. You want to clean it up first, move it over to S4HANA, but then you want to make sure that the processes and the people and the governance and all the stuff we just talked about are in place as well.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Definitely some interesting moves, and I think good moves probably for SAP, but I'm interested to see obviously how that develops further.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be interesting to keep an eye on that. And it's hard to have any conversations about S4HANA without talking about data and or AI. And so that's certainly true here in today's episode. But we are going to shift gears and sort of do a bit of a detour here away from AI and away from cool technology stuff. And we're going to get to the human side of S4HANA implementations. We're going to talk about change management. So we're going to bring on Julia Joyce and Sarah Stanley-Smith from the Third Stage Consulting team in Europe. And they're going to be on the show talking about organizational change management lessons from S4HANA implementation. So they're going to share some of their takeaways and lessons from having helped some of our largest clients, especially in Europe, through their change management or through their S4HANA implementations. Even if you're not based in Europe or where they are, this is sort of a universal topic that's going to be of interest to anyone throughout the world that's managing change and managing people in their transformation. So stick around. We'll be right back. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Journey to S4HANA podcast. If you're going through an S4HANA implementation, you're looking for best practices and tips on how to make your project more successful, I encourage you to check out two resources that I made available to our listeners here on this podcast. First is our guide to a successful S4HANA implementation. It's a paper that I wrote based on all of our clients that have implemented S4HANA, some of the lessons we've learned, some of the best practices that we typically advise our clients to follow when going through their S4HANA implementation. So be sure to check that out. You can find that in the links below in this podcast. You can also scan the QR code right in front of you. The second thing you might want to check out is an online course that I've created. It's a course that's called the Deep Dive into SAP S4HANA implementations. And in that 2.5-hour course, I get into all the basics of what SAP S4HANA is, what it takes to make the project more successful, how to manage change, how to handle the project planning, how to manage your system integrator. as well as some case studies from some of our clients and some of the lessons learned from some of our clients. So check out that training as well. So there's two things you could check out here, both in the links below. One is the guide to S4HANA implementations. The other is my S4HANA training course. So be sure to check it out. And our goal here is to help you be more successful in your transformation. So I hope you found this information useful, and we'll continue on with the show.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to the Journey to S4HANA podcast, Season 1, Episode 8. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Fiakuski. This show is released every week. You can find new episodes at journeytosforhana.com. This is, as I mentioned, Season 1, Episode 8, and you can find past episodes of the show at Journey to S4HANA as well. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their S4HANA implementations as well as other digital transformations, including the digital strategy and the implementation of S4HANA and other enterprise technologies. This show is produced by Major Tom Productions. If you'd like to feature your brand or sponsor this podcast or other podcasts that we produce, you can reach out to Major Tom using the contact information below. So I'm excited for our next guest. First time we've really delved into the topic of organizational change management so far on this podcast. But then again, this podcast is relatively new, and this won't be the last time we'll talk about change management and dive into this topic, because it's something that's it's hard not to. Even if you wanted to not talk about it, you kind of have to talk about change management when you think about S4HANA implementations. And joining us for this conversation is Julia Joyce and Sarah Stanley-Smith, who are consultants on our Third Stage Consulting team based in Europe. One is in UK, the other one is Scotland. And we're going to bring them on the show here to chat about change management, some of their lessons from having worked with some of our global clients on their change management initiatives as part of their S4HANA implementation. So with all that being said, Julia and Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So Julia, let's start with you. Julia Joyce, you're from the UK. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
So yeah, sure. So this afternoon, I'm joining you from Scotland, where it is very cold. So if you're from Scotland this afternoon, hello. So my background in organisational change has mostly been IT implementations, so ERPs, smaller systems. I've worked with a range of different companies in the industries, ranging from aviation to financial services to higher education. And most recently, the role that I'm doing is implementation of Dynamics 365 to a higher education institution.
Great. Well, thank you for being here all the way from Scotland. I apologize. I sort of lumped you into the UK. I should have differentiated.
That's all right.
Rookie mistake from the American here on the podcast. And then we also have Sarah Stanley-Smith. Sarah, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, guys. So I'm Sarah. I'm joining you today from Derbyshire. So if you don't know where that is, it's kind of in the middle of England. I spent the last about 12 years working in corporate change management for a variety of different clients. It's quite similar to Julia. My experience spans a number of different industries, so rail, automotive, utilities, oil, and most recently in retail. APMG practitioner certified, which is quite similar to ProSci, if you guys have come across that. And bulk of my experience really has been in digital transformations, so largely kind of ERP system upgrades. But I have also been involved in some quite quirky projects, such as sort of opening new distribution centres and office moves and things like that.
Great. And just to reiterate too, I mean, you both have experience with change management on S/4HANA implementations, but as you guys have mentioned here in your introductions, also other ERP implementations as well. And I think one of the themes we're probably going to get to here today is that a lot of what we talk about today, even though the topic is S/4HANA implementations, it's really relevant to any sort of ERP implementation as well. And maybe as a starting point, let's start with you, Sarah. As a general starting point, why is change management so important in S/4HANA implementations or any ERP implementation for that matter?
Yes, I mean, I kind of reiterating what you're saying, Eric, that change management is absolutely crucial kind of for any ERP or digital transformation. And I think really this is because essentially these projects, whilst they're technical in nature, they're all about people. So it's all about the end users and how the end users are using that system. So at the end of the day, it's kind of the end user that has to go on that transformation journey. And they're the people who are going to be using the new system, once the project's closed down and the project team has disbanded and, moved on to other things. So in order to kind of ensure that people use that new system fully and gain all the wonderful benefits that you get, listed in the business benefits case, change management, it must be effectively embedded and the changes to make them manageable to the end users. So again, it really goes back to it's all about the people. And whilst you might have this, shiny new ERP tool to play with, if nobody understands kind of how to use it or why you're using it in the first place, it's just not going to work. And so that's kind of the crux of it, I would say.
Yeah, makes total sense. It seems like S/4HANA projects are so complex and the software is so complex that a lot of times you get so caught up in just making the technology work that you forget about that important people side, it seems. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Julia? Why is change management so important?
I think really just to echo Sarah's points is that change management is only as good as the individuals that are using it, or an ERP is only as good as the individuals that are using it. If you have a shiny multi-million-pound new spanking new system that no one knows how to use or are unhappy with it or can't get to grips with it or still want to use the legacy systems or spreadsheets, you really aren't going to get that return on that investment.
Right. Yeah, that's a key point. That last thing you just said about return on investment and getting actual business value out of the system and deploying a system that not only works technically but works from a people and operational perspective as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
I'd be curious to hear from the audience too. Why do you all think change is so important? Is it important? I mean, I'd be curious to hear if anyone thinks change management isn't important. I'd be surprised if we heard that, but you never know. I'd love to hear from the audience your views on change management and why it's so important. How do you see change management being different for S/4HANA implementations compared to other sorts of technology or business change initiatives that you've been involved with?
Julia,
let's start with Julia on that one. Sorry, I'm supposed to prompt you. I'm supposed to answer the question.
Okay. I think initially what I would say is that every change implementation is different because there's a number of different variables in there, including what people have used before, what the organizational what's the word I'm looking for, appetite is for change, what the kind of, what the culture is in the organization. So there's lots of different variables that will impact change and that change journey. And the ERP or what the solution is one of those variables. So notwithstanding those, using SAP for HANA, I think it's a big system. Okay, it's a big system with lots of bits. I think it's quite complex for people to get their heads around, especially if you've come from lots of legacy systems. Again, one of the questions is where's that gap of where you've come from to where you're going to? If you've come from, I don't know, a bunch of spreadsheets and legacy systems, that jump to SAP for HANA is potentially massive for people. That's a big it's a big jump for people to actually make in terms of their heads and their abilities and capabilities. And even if you've come from a previous iteration of SAP, it's still quite a big jump in terms of the way that it's used differently. So I think that what I'm trying to say is that every change is different, and there's lots of variables involved in delivery of that change.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes total sense. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, really. I mean, I think the key for me is that kind of it doesn't really matter almost what system you're using. You're still going to have to go through that same change management framework process. So you're still going to need to do, change management strategy and plan, your readiness assessments, all the comms and the training, all this really good stuff that's really important for people to make that journey. But I think it's really important to make sure that your impact assessments, so, Julia kind of mentioned it, but looking at how the organization is today and how it's going to look in the future, doing that assessment in enough depth and enough coverage is really important, because if you don't know how it's changing, you can't kind of guide people through that journey. And I think it's the same for, SAP or S4HANA, but any kind of ERP system, you're going to have to do that assessment to make sure it's effective, and ultimately make sure that people know what's going on, when we switch it on.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it makes total sense. And then I also want to turn to the audience too. I had asked a couple questions of them. I asked where they're joining from first and foremost. We have people from all over the world, as I mentioned before. We have Natalia from London, UK, Sandra from Regina, SK. It's Aditya from Calgary, Canada. Someone joining from Divya, USA, Boston, Massachusetts, New Brunswick, Canada, Curacao, Williamstead, Curacao, very pretty part of the world. So thank you all for joining here today, people from all over the world. So thank you for that. A couple of comments too. This is from Tofik on LinkedIn. Tofik, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly or close to correctly. He says change management is the key to success. So at least we have one person on board so far, at least one person that's agreeing that change management is really important. So thank you for that. And then also from LinkedIn, this is from Alcinda. Alcinda says change management is one of the key levers you pull to execute a digital strategy. Otherwise, you would have just spent that investment on a shiny object that isn't used. I think that's very consistent with what you both just alluded to as well. S4HANA is a great technology, a lot of groundbreaking stuff and capability in the software, but that doesn't really matter if people aren't using it and it's not helping make the business and the operations better. So thank you for that feedback. I'm here with Julia and Sarah from the Third Stage Consulting Europe team talking about lessons from S4HANA implementations from the perspective of change management and people. We've got a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Journey to S4HANA podcast. Hi, this is Eric Kimberly, and I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting Group. And I wanted to take a moment and tell you a little bit about Third Stage and what we do and how we help clients through their S4HANA implementations. First of all, Third Stage is technology agnostic, meaning that we're not affiliated with SAP. However, we do have quite a bit of experience helping clients through their S4HANA implementations. We help clients evaluate and do a fit gap analysis of S4HANA. We help them find the right system integrator. We help them negotiate their contracts with SAP and their system integrator. And then we also help with implementation planning and the implementation itself. So we help mobilize the right resources, make sure you've got a solid and realistic program to manage overall S4HANA implementation. And then we'll help with the program management, the change management, as well as process improvement. We also provide some technical services around data migration, as well as architecture and system integration as well. So those are just some of the things we can do to help you through your transformation. And if you're looking for more information about it, or if you'd like to learn more, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to just bounce around ideas or be an informal sounding board for you as you begin your transformation. You can reach me by contacting me via the contact information in the links below in the description field for this podcast. So look forward to chatting with you, and we'll see you soon.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organisations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Fiakuski. You can find new episodes of this show at journeyto4hana.com, and you can also find the 7 previous episodes that you might have missed if you're new to the show. The 7 previous episodes you can find by going to Journey to S4HANA. This show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, an independent consulting firm that helps clients with their S4HANA and ERP implementations, and it is produced by Major Tom Productions. And you can learn more about sponsoring this podcast and other content we create by contacting Major Tom Productions via the contact information below. So I'm here in the midst of a conversation with Julia and Sarah from the Third Stage Consulting team talking about change management lessons from S4HANA implementations. Let's jump back into where we left off. One other comment here, a follow-up here from Tafik. He says, change management is the key to success. At the end, it's people within the organization that utilize the ERP system. If the change impact is not managed within the organization and the people, the implementation process could be jeopardized. So change impact being one of the key words here. I guess just sort of maybe a follow-up question or a building on Tafik's point there. How big are these impacts typically that you see, with whether it's S4HANA implementations or any sort of massive ERP implementation? How big are the impacts? Are they as big as we think? Are they bigger? Like, how would you explain or summarize how big those changes are? Let's start with you, Sarah.
I mean, it really, really does depend on the organization and the people. There's so many variations to this. You can kind of open the Pandora's box, as it were, and look inside, and you've got all these really great people who are very sort of tech savvy, and perhaps the change isn't quite as big for those types of people. But I think Julia mentioned it earlier, you've got kind of colleagues that may have been using Excel for the last 20 years, instead of an ERP. And somebody who is in that scenario, that's going to be a much bigger impact to that sort of person than it might be for somebody else. So I think it really does vary. I think also there's kind of maybe a bit of a sort of a misconception that if people are already using SAP, going from SAP to S4HANA would be easy, right? But I think that's quite a risky assumption to make, just because it is quite a different tool, and it's less customizable, all these kind of things. So I think, again, you might go, oh yeah, they're already using SAP, isn't that brilliant? We'll switch it on and they'll be fine. But it's, even that can actually be a really, really big impact to quite a lot of people in the company. So just really important to make sure that impact assessment is done in that detail to uncover those things.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Julia?
I'm just looking at the question raised by Natalia in terms of how do we structure that for an ERP. I tend to do it by process and look at, first of all, but the way that I would structure it is I would look at each department or each function that has been impacted, then have a look at those processes and work with a business analyst to see what the processes are, build a process taxonomy, and then what I would probably do is do a heat map of how many processes are being impacted for every team, and that will help you understand where the red areas are, areas where you want to focus more change effort than other areas, and that's a really good starting point. And then from there, there's obviously lots of different things that you can drill it down into, things like role mapping, other types of things as well. But for me, processes are at the core of that. So
yeah, and leading with the process and looking at how the software is going to work with those processes, and then ultimately figuring out how's that different than the way you're doing things today.
And I think the other thing that I wanted to say is the UI or the user interface. That's a really important thing to think about as well, because it's all very well moving to an ERP, but if you're moving to an ERP which is, let's say, fiddly to use, or its interface isn't as user friendly as you would expect, that's a challenge to change as well, is to get people to start thinking in that particular language, or using that kind of skill set, or expecting to see that. And if we're using the ProSci model, that's where this knowledge and ability comes into place before we go live, is to let people understand and see and play with it before we hit the ground running. And then at least then they've got a chance of, when we go live, they're more successful using it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sarah, you had an interesting point too that I want to come back to, that I don't want to gloss over, which is the fact that if you're an existing SAP customer, let's say you're using R3 or even ECC, and there's this perception oftentimes that it's a lift and shift, it's still SAP. Yeah, it might be a little bit different, but it's for the most part going to be the same system. And to your point, it's really not. I mean, I think it's worth highlighting that point you made, which is it's a total rewrite of the technology. So it's an entirely new system. Yes, it kind of has a similar SAP look and feel that, SAP customers might find somewhat familiar, but the capabilities, the processes, the way it works, especially as you mentioned, the private cloud, and even more so the public cloud version of S/4HANA is going to be less flexible, and it's going to be probably a bigger change than you think for a lot of organizations, especially if you have a lot of customizations in your legacy SAP environment. You're not going to have that in the new environment, presumably.
I think that's actually a really big issue, because that kind of creates, I find, a lot of change resistance. So people who are used to the customization element and quite enjoy that aspect of it, to have that taken away, it's a very hard thing to then sell to people. They go, oh, where's my, whatever it is, I'm used to doing it this way. And all of a sudden, the change manager's coming in and saying, oh yeah, we're taking all that lovely customization away from you. How do you feel about that? So it's quite difficult. And if that's not managed properly and given kind of the time and the engagement that is needed with the end users, it can become a really negative thing, and people go, I don't want this, and they kind of actively start to resist it, which is where you really, really don't want to be.
Yeah, that's a good point. And maybe I'll ask you this, Julia. This is off script. I'll warn you ahead of time. I didn't prep you for this question, but when you think about some of the emerging technologies that SAP and other vendors have, like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and some of the analytics and things, some of the automation technologies that maybe are a bit more, call it aggressive in the ability to automate a human's job. Do you guys see that being is that a bigger threat? Is that create more change resistance? In other words, do the more advanced technologies that can actually do more and deliver more business value, does that create more of a threat to people, and from a change management perspective? What do you think, Julia?
Funnily enough, I'm starting off a digital transformation with the organization that I'm working with at the moment. And part of that is about encompassing AI into that. And while I feel like, the organization has done some research of that into the past. It's a university, so they've done some research into how students feel about AI. And the research that came out was that they feel that it's part threat and part opportunity as well. But I think the fear with people is that they don't understand how to use it properly. What would be, for a student, for example, to be or what is just using AI to do what it's meant to do. So I think there's a real mix of feeling that it's a threat and it can take over your job, but there's also a real feeling that with proper education about AI and ChatGPT and all of the other things, is that there is a feeling that it is potentially a good opportunity for us for an organisation to take a step change digitally, to move forward into that world. But again, it's about that messaging and management of that message, and not letting people just run with their own perceptions of what AI is.
Right. Yeah. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I agree. And I think you've hit it on the head there, Julia, when it's about, saying it's about messaging, because at the end of the day, if all this great new stuff's coming into the business and we haven't properly told the person what that means for them, people tend to go for kind of, if you've got options on the table, they tend to go for the negative one and go, oh, that means I'm going to lose my job, even if it's not the case. And if you haven't kind of taken people through that engagement journey, people get really worried, and then performance drops, all these kind of horrible things you really want to avoid. So I think the key is to kind of explain it to people in the way that they understand, but be really open and honest about people and give them time to digest what's happening. And if you can do that, people are much more willing to kind of engage with it and start to embrace the change rather than going, oh no, this is automatically bad for me. I'm going to do this active quitting kind of sort of step away kind of thing. Because again, that's the worst scenario, which we really want to try and avoid.
Yeah, active quitting. That's a good thread to pull into this too. It seems like that's the thing that a lot of organizations overlook is they look for the obvious sabotage resistors, the people that are just blatantly opposed to the project. And those people are hard to find because there's usually not that many of them. And usually that's not the biggest threat. It seems like the biggest threat are the active quitters, the people that they're on board with change in general. But now that you're rocking my world or disrupting my world, now I'm going to resist it because I'm not as excited about it now that you're telling me how to change my job.
It's quite contagious as well, isn't it? Sorry, Julia, I was just going to say there's this kind of rolling effect. You sort of see one person who starts to maybe panic a little bit and then it spreads and it's like wildfire, and it's once that's happened, it's a really hard fire to put out, I find, whereas you could have probably prevented it in the first place by doing your change management effectively.
Yeah. And I think there, just to touch on a question that I can see that someone's asked is about expectations management. And yes, you're absolutely right, is that it's about setting that clear vision at the end, what the organization is going to look like and what it's going to look like for an individual stroke team stroke department is really important so that they can buy into it. Absolutely, it's the fear of the unknown. If you just say we're changing and we've got a digital transformation, I'm a change manager, I would panic at that because I think I don't know what that means. What does it mean? Am I going to be asked to do something that I don't know how to do? Do I have to learn a new system? Is it going to be harder? Is it going to take away? Am I going to lose my job? Sell a vision, be clear about the vision and the disbenefits that might bring, because clearly, there may be disbenefits, there may be an organizational restructure, but along with that comes benefits, and at least you've been honest and transparent, and that really helps people at the outset of the journey get it in their head and helps them move forward that little bit, because what we don't want people to do is to stay where they are or to move back. We want people to be moving forward in that change journey, even incrementally, even just a little step forward at any time.
I'm here with Julia and Sarah from the Third Stage Consulting Europe team talking about lessons from S4HANA implementations from the perspective of change management and people. We've got a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Journey to S4HANA podcast. People oftentimes ask me how I built such a strong social media following on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and other outlets. And the fact of the matter is it took me a long time to build a following through a lot of trial and error, making a lot of mistakes. Had I known that there were companies out there that could help me build my brand, I would have done that a long time ago. I didn't know that, but the good news is that there is today a consulting firm that will help you through building your own personal brand through some of their training programs. The company is called Roloff Consulting, and if you're familiar with Emma Roloff, she's someone that I've had on this podcast before, and she's well known in the digital transformation space as well as the sales space. And she's big on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And she and her husband have started a training course and a training company that focuses on helping people build their personal brands and helping them to sell themselves digitally. So whether you're a salesperson that's trying to reach more customers or you're an individual that's just trying to build your personal brand, that's something that they help with through their training programs. And they've offered listeners of this podcast a free 5-day LinkedIn challenge. And I encourage you to check it out. I've included a link below for this podcast. If you go to the podcast notes, you'll find a link that gets you free access to this 5-day challenge where you'll get step-by-step guidance. You'll get real results. So you'll get some tangible results from the program. And you also get a special offer at the end of it. So it's exclusive to listeners of this podcast. Be sure to check out the link below if you want to work on building your personal brand, or if you're in sales and you're trying to reach more people. Whatever the case may be, check it out. It's free to listeners of this podcast. You can check it out via the link below.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, welcome back to the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Fiakuski. You can find new episodes of this show at journeytosforhana.com, and you can also find the 7 previous episodes that you might have missed if you're new to the show. The 7 previous episodes you can find by going to Journey to S4HANA. This show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, an independent consulting firm that helps clients with their S4HANA and ERP implementations, and it is produced by Major Tom Productions. And you can learn more about sponsoring this podcast and other content we create by contacting Major Tom Productions via the contact information below. So I'm here in the midst of a conversation with Julia and Sarah from the Third Stage Consulting team talking about change management lessons from S4HANA implementations. Let's jump back into where we left off. I think we're leading into, or a nice segue into another question I had for you is, why do so many organizations and project teams overlook the importance of change management? If it's as important as we're all saying it is, the audience seems to be in agreement that yes, change management is important, then why do organizations and project teams overlook that so much? Why don't we start with you, Sarah?
Sure, I kind of think it's twofold, actually. So maybe this is slightly kind of used to happen more than it did in the past, because I know sort of change management, I think, is being more embraced as time goes on and people do start to see the value of it. But in my personal experience, I've had a lot of people kind of view it as being this kind of fluffy, nice to have thing. You know, we come in and we do a bit of communications, we might do a bit of training, you know, we're a bit of cheerleading for the project or whatever it might be. But I think this is kind of a fundamental misconception of the value that change management can bring, and it can really hinder, you know, your ERP program or your digital transformation. And I kind of think the main problem or the main issue around this is that people don't fully understand what change management is and what value it can bring. So in my mind, I think you could or you should view it as being just as crucial to a project as project management, for example. So you wouldn't start one of these projects without a project manager. You shouldn't start one without a change manager either. So I think that's kind of the first thing. I think the second thing is that people have often had quite a bad experience on change programs, possibly because there hasn't been a change manager, or they've been kind of thrown in at the end and it hasn't worked out for whatever reason. So there might be this kind of negative buildup of, oh, I've been through change before and it was terrible and change management is rubbish because it doesn't work. But it's 9 times out of 10, it's because it hasn't been done properly or it hasn't been given the opportunity to kind of deliver that value. So I think those are kind of 2 things, quite different things going on, but in my experience, they're sort of semi-common, which is slightly worrying.
Yeah.
I think it's also about the change maturity of the organisation as a whole. I don't think I've worked in many organisations where they've been particularly mature at business change. So change management tends to happen sporadically because they have a project manager or a program director who knows about it, and then we organically come in like moles and say hi, and then we deliver good change, and then that helps spread the message. And I think that's quite common. I think that if you have a change management organization or a change management office or some sort of center of excellence as well, I do think people still, they need to do a really good PR job more than anybody else in terms of the benefits that change management brings, because otherwise people will still cling on to this idea that we're just about comms and training, and then therefore that is seen as an added cost and an overhead that could potentially be done by the project manager or a BA, insert other existing person on the project, and that's part of the problem as well, is that change management needs really strong PR.
Yeah, that's it. You bring up a really good point, Julia, and that is, you mentioned that oftentimes people will view change management as training and comms. And I think that's probably the 2 most obvious first things that we think of when we think of change management. We think about, we've got to train people how to use the system, and we've got to do some communication to make sure people understand what's going on with the project and what the changes are at a high level. How would you summarize, maybe I'll start with you, Julia, since you triggered this question in my head. How would you summarize just some of the other things, without going into detailed methodologies necessarily, but what are some of the major components of change management outside of train the trainer and basic communications?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so first of all, we start off with stakeholders, stakeholder analysis, stakeholder identification, and from there create a stakeholder strategy to make sure that you have categorized your stakeholders and you're bringing them along with you on that journey as well, to make sure that you've got some way of making sure that you've given the right people the right messages at the right time outside of mass communications. Okay, that's not necessarily done by the change manager, but you're encouraging the sponsor and whoever is best placed to take that message forward. So making sure that you're, let's say, building a coalition of change that way. So that's one thing. I think secondly, we've touched on it, is the bit that's absolutely core to me is this change impact assessment. You will never be able to deliver, well, you might be by luck, but certainly not by design, successful change if you don't understand the core of what is actually changing. So there's a massive piece of work that needs to be done about understanding the processes, understanding the process taxonomy, looking at what they're going from where they're going to, understanding that gap, understanding how big that change is for each of those areas or each of those teams, individuals, departments, however you want to break it down, and then looking to see how you're going to build that gap for change. Now, that could be communications, it could be training, it could be a number of other things, but for me, change impact is the absolute core of what we do, and that has got nothing to do with comms and nothing to do, that's the output of that comms and training. The change impact is the absolute core of what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great overview. What would you add anything to that, Sarah, as far as major work streams within change management?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in addition to those kind of key bits, because obviously I do reiterate what Julia is saying, the impact assessment is absolutely crucial, and kind of everything else does spit out from that. But you've got items such as, business readiness assessments to make sure that the business is kind of ready and able and capable to take on the change. Another kind of key bit, which is kind of linked to communications and engagement, is your change network change agency network. So essentially, we kind of leading into this sort of building coalition of change, creating a network of internal advocates for all your change that can then kind of help drive and deliver. And they do help with kind of the training and the comms, but it's kind of it's the piece that comes before delivering those kind of key bits of work. And then I kind of on top of that, and towards the end of the project, actually, we get involved heavily in kind of support models, hypercare, lessons learned, all this kind of really good stuff as well that kind of helps with adoption and embedment. So it's kind of an all-encompassing role, actually, which is probably why we're tired quite a lot of the time, because we end up doing a lot of stuff. But in my experience, if you're on kind of a large ERP program, you will have a change manager, but you also have a training manager and a comms manager. So that kind of tells you that there's key roles for those two sections in addition to the change manager. So it really isn't just all about that. It's all this other really good stuff that kind of paints the picture as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, Sarah, you were talking about how resistance to change can spread like wildfire.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I'm sure you have both seen this in your careers. A lot of times as change practitioners, you get pulled into a firefighting situation where the change management is just out of control, tons of resistance. The rest of the project might be going fine. The technical piece of it might be going fine. We built a system that works, but now we've got some change issues and it's a mess, So I guess the question becomes, when should change management start so that we can avoid the wildfires and proactively get ahead of that resistance and turn it into a business value proposition instead of a firefighting proposition? What do you think, Sarah? When should change management begin?
I mean, as early as possible is always the answer to that question. So I kind of think as soon as you've got your project manager and your project team is being built, that's when the change manager needs to come in. Quite a lot of, or in my experience, I think quite a lot of organizations tend to get this wrong. And I'm not sure if it's because of kind of competing priorities or, it's an extra financial burden to bring somebody in sooner. But it's really crucial because kind of as we've alluded to at the front end of the project, we do so much information kind of gathering and data collection on how the organization is functioning. If we're brought in later, we're kind of playing catch up, and it's almost too late to kind of spend a good couple of months, whatever it is, kind of understanding the organization when you're trying to understand the future, if that makes sense. So I think, as soon as you've got your discovery phase going on and maybe the system implementator is coming on board to talk people through the new system and the benefits, that's where we should be starting, and be party to all of those technical meetings as well, just so that we've got kind of the ammunition and the material that we need to build those comms and engagement plans with the information that you get at that really early stage.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Julia? Anything to add to that?
No, other than to echo Sarah's comments, it's absolutely about setting the scene and understanding up front. to link that back to resistance as well, there's two ways that I like to manage resistance. Is first of all anticipated resistance. What do you expect people to be doing, so that you can build a strategy to deal with that. As you progress through the change, you will find that resistance pops out of anywhere, and there's, you obviously have to manage that as you go along. But apart from anything else, being in at the beginning can help you understand the landscape. It can help you understand who the teams are. Talking to stakeholders can help you understand their thoughts and things. And as well, if you bring change in at the beginning, that helps ensure that your leadership is aligned. Okay, so what you don't want to do, or certainly what I don't want to do, is to go through the change and find out that your key stakeholders, your sponsor network, or whatever you want to call them, has a different idea of what's happening. Bringing change management in at the beginning can help safeguard against that, so that your stakeholders are all in agreement about what's going to happen, that resistance from them is negated, and therefore they become ambassadors for change, and they can help manage resistance within their own teams and functions and areas.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, it's a good approach. Now, speaking of approaches and just sort of the way we tackle change management, SAP has their Activate methodology that many, if not most, organizations deploying S/4HANA will use. Does that Activate methodology give us what we need to deploy change management successfully?
I'll take this one. I'm going to say no. Looking at the methodology itself, change management appears to be in the layer that says project management, and I don't think that there's enough detail to that as well. And I think that's very much limited to things like mass communications and train the trainer. Hopefully in the past 35 minutes that we've identified that change is much more deeper and wider than those things as well. So I feel like if you were going to look at you're going to rely on the Activate methodology on its own, I really wouldn't be confident that you're going to get the level of return of investment from your people that you think that you're going to get from spending millions of pounds or dollars or whatever currency on a new ERP. However, I think that if you were to use a change manager with the Activate methodology and to complement that, that could work. But I would say on its own, it doesn't make me happy that it's included everything that I would do as a change manager for any project, let alone a large scale ERP digital transformation.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're going to just use that as a methodology in its own without the change management aspect, the people element just won't fly unless you have a miracle. Right. I think. However, I do think the Activate methodology has some good bits to it in terms of the change management side of things. So, the stages that it goes through, so the discover, prepare, explore, etc. I think those are really good phases to be able to hang your change management plan off. I think there was a question actually, and I've lost it now, but it was kind of how do project managers, I think, work with, would you set up two separate work streams or would you manage together versus separately? So I think that's quite interesting here, because you've kind of got your project management work stream and your tech work stream that will use the Activate methodology, and your change management work stream will run in parallel to that. So for the discovery phase, for example, when users are getting familiar with the benefits of SAP, that's when we would come in and do some analysis in terms of, benefits realization, prep, and all that kind of good stuff. So I think, very long-winded answer to your question, I think it's kind of doing it in tandem, and you can't really have one without the other. I think they need to be done together to get a successful result. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like that if you look at the Activate methodology on a page, there's a lot of weighting attached to other things like data integration and all of those things, and project management and change management is down the bottom. And I feel like they're all equally important as each other. You can have the best, data integration transformation if you want to, and the best data quality, but without project management and that discipline and change management discipline, do you know what I mean? I feel like it's suggesting that something is more important than another, and actually I would disagree with that.
Yeah, it almost, when I look at the Activate methodology, and it's not just Activate, by the way, it's the methodologies of other ERP vendors as well. But when you look at some of these methodologies like Activate, I feel like it's the technologist view of how a software should be deployed, and then they realize, wait, we do need to add some change management here. So let's pepper in a couple, training. Let's do some train the trainer. Let's do some basic communications, just so we can say we covered it. But I think what we're saying here is there's a lot more to it than kind of your basic technology driven change management focus.
Yeah.
I'm here with Julia and Sarah from the Third Stage Consulting Europe team, talking about lessons from S4HANA implementations from the perspective of change management and people. We've got a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Journey to S4HANA podcast.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Fiakuski. You can find new episodes of this show at journeytosforhana.com, and you can also find the 7 previous episodes that you might have missed if you're new to the show. The 7 previous episodes you can find by going to Journey to S4HANA. This show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, an independent consulting firm that helps clients with their S4HANA and ERP implementations, and it is produced by Major Tom Productions. And you can learn more about sponsoring this podcast and other content we create by contacting Major Tom Productions via the contact information below. So I'm here in the midst of a conversation with Julia and Sarah from the Third Stage Consulting team talking about change management lessons from S4HANA implementations. Let's jump back into where we left off. Yeah,
I think there was another question, about somebody, I think Natalia asked about how you demystify change management for tech teams. I think that's quite pertinent here as well, because I think this is all kind of hinging on the technology and the system, but not having kind of that, what's the word I want, kind of a roadmap and a strategy for change management in its own right. So in terms of demystifying, again, it's another good reason to bring us in early, because we can spend some time with the tech teams basically saying, hi, this is what we do. Yeah. Here's how we can help you. This is what value we can bring, and kind of get that really good professional relationship working up front. And then everybody kind of understands each other. So I think it's spending that time, isn't it? Yeah.
And actually, to echo Sarah's point, for me, architects and developers are absolutely key in terms of helping me understand the technical landscape so that I can translate that into something that is helpful for our users. it's very difficult to get information from somebody that doesn't understand what you do, because they feel like, why should I, or they're taking my homework. Explaining to an architect or to somebody else in the technical sphere what you're here to do unlocks and helps broker that relationship, so that you can extract what they've got in their mind and take that and use that as valuable collateral to help deliver that change message. So it's happened to me absolutely loads, where I will nicely suggest that we have a working session on change management. I'll talk through the roadmap, I'll talk through ADCAR or whichever methodology that we're using, and allow them to ask questions and explain why I need them to be part of my world as well, and make them feel important, not just that I'm just here to take over the world, but I need what's in their brains to help me do my job as well. And that tends to work quite well, and they do get infused and engaged because they can see the benefit of it, and they can see the benefit of it for them as well.
Right. Yeah, that's really well put. And one other thing I wanted to maybe add on to what you're both saying about, whether or not, going back to the point about whether or not the Activate methodology covers enough of what we need with change management, is you have to look at what SAP as a company is doing with the migrations of their customers too. They have the 2027 deadline to get legacy customers off of VCC and R3. And then they've also introduced this RISE program that's meant to get more of their legacy customers moved over to SAP S/4HANA Cloud. So SAP's focus as a company really is on getting as many of their customers shifted over to S/4HANA as quickly as possible within a pretty narrow window. And what I worry about is in the midst of all that chaos and that rush to get people moved over to S/4HANA, where does that leave change management? And are we going to focus enough time and effort? Do we have enough resources? Do we have enough time to focus on change management? That's what I worry about with S/4HANA implementations. I don't expect you guys to have an answer to that necessarily, but it is something I think undermines the importance of change management, which is why I think you're seeing so many S/4HANA implementations that are struggling and failing right now, is partially because people are rushing to try and just deploy technology for technology's sake.
Yeah. I've encountered that quite a lot of times, where people just say, we want an ERP, we want a digital transformation, we want it now for whatever reason. And that doesn't make it successful having it next week.
Right.
Well thought out, well managed change journeys involving and bringing your people together are what guarantees success. It's one thing to say to a board or to report as a sponsor, yes, I've delivered an X shiny new system, but the real success metric isn't when you go live. The real success metric is that reinforcement. What are people doing a year later? How well has it been used in anger? How well people have adopted to that? What's your attrition rate with staff? How do people feel about it? That's your success measure.
Right.
I do worry that, as you're saying, Eric, with this deadline, if things are kind of rushed towards the end, oh gosh, we've got 6 months left to do this. Let's get a whole team of change managers in because that will fix it. Again, that's creating, we spoke about it earlier, but that negative experience of change management, because that's not how it's supposed to be. And I do worry there'll be a lot of companies suddenly go, oh my gosh, we've got to hit this target. And then it's going to cause so many problems, in sort of 12, 18 months down the line, when, as Julia said, people are going, oh yeah, we don't know how to use it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We're not getting any business value out of it, but we spent a lot of money.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
There's a
100%. question
question I want to come back to from Kyler on LinkedIn. This is a great question. It sort of ties into what we're talking about here on this thread of, is the Activate methodology enough? And I think what we're saying is it gives us a starting point or some bits and pieces of methodology to begin with, but we've got to augment Activate with real change management muscle. And here's another sort of similar question that Kyler has on LinkedIn is, do you really need an outside independent or tech agnostic change management firm to support change management in an S/4HANA implementation, or can it be handled by the system integrator? Maybe I'll just add another layer to this. Do system integrators typically do this stuff in your experience? Is that enough if we say, hey, we've hired one of the big or one of the major system integrators, they'll handle change management for us? Is that a reasonable expectation, or what's your experience been? Start with you, Sarah.
So in my experience, I was going to say, like, sort of 99% of the people I've worked for have got an outside OCM companies come in, or relied on kind of permanent change managers if they have the resource to get those guys involved. And I personally think that works better, just because I feel like the SI has its own priorities, and they're not always the same as the change management element. So if you are external to that SI when they come in, you're able to challenge more effectively, I think, when maybe the people element isn't being considered as highly as it should. Whereas if you're kind of within that sort of SI bubble, you're going to go with the SI company's priorities, rather than going, actually, guys, wait a sec, we haven't thought about, I don't know, the finance team over here, and we haven't given them enough attention, or whatever the case may be. So I definitely think it's more beneficial having people on the outside, unless you've got a system implementator who is very keyed up on change management and has that freedom to allow the change manager to kind of, challenge, I think.
Yeah.
For me, I think change management is a, I don't know, let's call it a critical friend. Is that that objectivity is key for me, because you're the one person that's trying to, or you're one team that's trying to manage that resistance. It's trying to, get people to come round with your way of thinking, and you do need to be objective, and you do need to, I think part of the skill of being a change manager is being able to say, is having the confidence to say, look, in terms of change, a metric, we are red because people aren't ready to go. So while you might be on time, on budget, your scope might be fine, actually, if your people aren't ready to go, then you're not, and you need to have that confidence to be able to say that. And sometimes as a change manager, you don't, as I'm segueing slightly, but sometimes as one person, a lone voice, is that you don't always have that backup to tell you that. So being a change manager and being that objective person, it's about getting relationships with your sponsor and making sure your sponsor understands and listens the importance of it, so they can give that message as well. And being objective is really what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. It seems like, in my experience too, system integrators or any implementation partner of SAP, they sort of have their blinders on, not because they want to be blinded, but because they're so focused on S/4HANA as a product. And my job is to deploy S/4HANA. And my job is to get people to use S/4HANA. And that's fine. You need that skill set, obviously, on a project team. But what you guys are saying is a little bit different. You're not coming at it from a SAP first perspective. You're coming at more from a business and people first perspective. And we've got to figure out how to bridge that gap between S/4HANA first and now business and technology. How do we translate that S/4HANA competency over into actual usage and value and adoption?
We want to make sure people are moving at the same, or the people are moving at the same speed as the technology, really. And we need,
it can be really tricky sometimes, can't it? To make sure you've got that balance right. But
well, especially because technology is changing, so it's exponentially increasing its rate of change, and we as humans are not changing really any faster. I mean, I guess we've gotten used to change maybe a little bit more, but I would argue we're not capable of moving as fast as technology is changing, and which puts even more pressure and more importance on change management.
Definitely.
What do you think some of the biggest challenges are? I know we've touched on some of this already, but when you look at an S/4HANA implementation or any ERP implementation for that matter, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see from a change management and people perspective? Let's start with you, Julia.
Sorry, since I started to speak.
Yeah, that's right. I keep forgetting to prompt.
Give me time to think.
I think there are many, and again, as we said, it's dependent on lots of things. I think that one of the biggest challenges with doing a digital transformation and moving to an ERP is the scale of the change and the jump from the using spreadsheets and legacy systems into an all singing, all dancing one system that looks and feels completely different, and you'll have to work completely different. That is a big mental jump for people to make. With or without change management, we can, obviously our job is to make that easier for people, but that is a big challenge in people's heads. And also what I wanted to say is that change management is about appealing to people's hearts and minds. And so while you can train people and say, right, to do this process, you press that button there and then that button, and then you press save and then you do something else, that's fine. You're teaching them about the process. But in order to get the value from an ERP, it's about appealing to people's hearts and minds about the benefits of an ERP. And I think that sometimes can be overlooked, is that we're trying to look big picture here about the vision. So that leads me on to one of the biggest challenges, and something that I've experienced a couple of times is trying to get your senior people, your sponsors, to nail down the vision. So quite often they'll say, right, we want to do X, or we want to have an ERP or a digital transformation or whatever they want to have. And then the natural question that we would ask as change managers is to say, what does that look like? Tell me, paint a picture of what that looks like for this function, for that function. How does it look like for each function? How does that fit with architecture? And they go, don't really know. We just want a digital transformation. So stage one is to pull it out of their head and make sure that everybody understands how that's working and what it looks like, so that we've got something to sell. It's very difficult to deliver change, and where people are going, well, what are you actually delivering? We're going, I don't really know. We need to know to be able to do our jobs properly. So those are some of the challenges that we get. There are many. I could talk forever about them, but those are just some off the top of my head.
Yeah. What would you add to that, Sarah?
I think it's kind of linked to that, actually, is that the process Julie's kind of just given us an overview of is quite long-winded, or it can be, because if kind of your senior leadership and your sponsors haven't really got an idea of what it is they want, it does take quite a lot of time and effort to get that out of people. And I think often it's a case of, oh, just have a meeting and, we'll get some outputs and it will be fine. But I think people don't appreciate how long some of the activity that we do takes. And people get frustrated because they kind of go, oh, you can have X done in a month, it will be fine. But if it doesn't go to plan, it's, oh, we haven't got time to go back and redo it, or whatever it is. So I think it's just this lack of appreciation about how difficult it is, actually, I think, to take people on a change management journey. It really is, and it can vary quite a lot. So it's quite an unpredictable thing to be able to sort of scope out. At the start of a project, your sponsor might say to you, right, well, how long is it going to take? And you go, well, I don't know yet, because, I haven't done the analysis to be able to sort of define how complicated it's going to be. So yeah, kind of this lack of appreciation, I think, in terms of the time and the effort it takes is a big thing. Hence, again, why we need to be sort of involved really early on, so we can kind of go through that journey with the sponsors and the leadership.
I'm here with Julia and Sarah from the Third Stage Consulting Europe team, talking about lessons from S4HANA implementations from the perspective of change management and people. We've got a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Journey to S4HANA podcast. Hi, this is Eric Kimberly, and I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting Group. And I wanted to take a moment and tell you a little bit about Third Stage and what we do and how we help clients through their S4HANA implementations. First of all, Third Stage is technology agnostic, meaning that we're not affiliated with SAP. However, we do have quite a bit of experience helping clients through their S4HANA implementations. We help clients evaluate and do a fit gap analysis of S4HANA. We help them find the right system integrator. We help them negotiate their contracts with SAP and their system integrator. And then we also help with implementation planning and the implementation itself. So we help mobilize the right resources, make sure you've got a solid and realistic program to manage overall S4HANA implementation. And then we'll help with the program management, the change management, as well as process improvement. We also provide some technical services around data migration, as well as architecture and system integration as well. So those are just some of the things we can do to help you through your transformation. And if you're looking for more information about it, or if you'd like to learn more, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to just bounce around ideas or be an informal sounding board for you as you begin your transformation. You can reach me by contacting me via the contact information in the links below in the description field for this podcast. So look forward to chatting with you, and we'll see you soon.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Fiakuski. You can find new episodes of this show at journeytosforhana.com, and you can also find the 7 previous episodes that you might have missed if you're new to the show. The 7 previous episodes you can find by going to Journey to S4HANA. This show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, an independent consulting firm that helps clients with their S4HANA and ERP implementations. and it is produced by Major Tom Productions. And you can learn more about sponsoring this podcast and other content we create by contacting Major Tom Productions via the contact information below. So I'm here in the midst of a conversation with Julia and Sarah from the Third Stage Consulting team talking about change management lessons from S4HANA implementations. Let's jump back into where we left off. You look at how many project teams and organizations put together their S4HANA implementation plan based on a proposal from an SI that's based on a technical implementation. And then you look at the magnitude of change, and obviously the magnitude of change could be anywhere from a lot of change to a real lot of change, or somewhere in between. And that's ultimately going to determine how quickly you can deploy S4HANA or any technology. But yet so many organizations don't start change management until later. So it's like, how can you really know how long a project's going to take and how much you're going to spend and how much chaos it's going to cause within your organization unless you've done some sort of organizational assessment up front as part of your planning process? And that, I don't know is that a common challenge you guys see, or how have you navigated that in the past?
I think it's more common than it really should be, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think, again, it comes back to this kind of concept that people don't really understand what the change management aspect is. So I think kind of the way I approach it is to kind of speak with your leadership about it and kind of show them the value of what doing this, this particular activity early will bring you versus what happens if we leave it too late. And sort of really high level, but depicting those scenarios, I think is quite powerful in going, this is why we need to do it now. If we don't, these are the things that are going to, likely to happen.
Yeah. Here's Alcinda's bringing the heat here with a lot of really good questions, which I like. So Alcinda on LinkedIn asked a really good question, sort of related to this all, which is, who should own change management during a digital transformation process? Is it the human capital function, the business itself, or someone else? Who owns change management within an organization, or who should it be?
I think there's a number of different models that you can use. I've worked in organizations where the change managers have belonged to the business. Where I'm working now, they work within the IT function. So it partially depends on the business and how that works. I find that when you're part of the business, there's a risk that you can be on the side of the business and you're not truly independent. What I would advocate for is a model that is where it allows you to be objective and challenge appropriately. And I don't know. I mean, it depends on it depends on how much. For example, human capital is involved in the change. Again, I think the key questions that I would ask are: does it allow you, the change manager, to be objective? Does it allow them to freely answer and ask questions that might be difficult? Or are they reined in and curtailed by the politics of their department? That's where it starts to get a little bit sticky. So I would advocate something that is objective, independent, however that looks in the organization. I don't know, because every organization is different, but that's where I would feel more comfortable. But I would also add to that as well, is that a change management model where you have a close-ish working relationship with the sponsor is absolutely key. If you are 3 steps removed from the sponsor and you can't speak to them because it has to be the project manager and they have to broker that conversation, that's going to dilute down the messages that you've got, because they may not want to deliver that message and you're reliant on them to deliver the message that you want to do and get the answer that you need. So it depends, but anything that allows you to have an open and honest relationship with your sponsor is a good one for me.
Yeah, pretty good. What would you add to that, Sarah?
I think I'd just add that change management can never be isolated or insular. So because the nature of the change, especially with ERPs, tend to be company-wide, I think it doesn't necessarily matter where you're sat. Obviously, you need to have buy-in from that particular department. But say, for example, your change management, your line is sat in the IT department. I think it's really important that you have sponsors or leaders in other departments within the company that are bought in, so that when you're trying to deliver something that maybe isn't kind of in the IT swim lane, you've got an advocate in the other business areas to support you with that. Because otherwise what happens is you try to deliver something or achieve something in a different swim lane, and nobody gets it. Nobody gets why you're doing it. And then the IT might get a bit annoyed that you're stepping out of the swim lane. So you kind of need to have this, as Julia said, this model that's kind of spread out across the organization. And it links to something I mentioned earlier about your sort of change agent network, this sort of, coalition of change. It has to be people kind of at the bottom rung, but also at that leadership level. So, somebody to have your back and have your agenda front of mind when you're going into these different kind of scenarios. That's really important.
Yeah. It's you have to think about you talked earlier about change impact and some of the readiness activities that need to happen. I mean, you have to figure out who's going to do this stuff and who's most qualified to do it, and how can you organize it in a way that's integrated and part of the team. Do you see that? I'm curious to hear your perspectives on this, and maybe we can start with you, Sarah, since you brought it up. But do you see it more often than not that the change team, there's a tendency to want to have a separate change team, separate work stream that's off in a silo doing its own thing? Or have you seen pretty good intuition or success from organizations that want to integrate change management into the program?
I think it's so varied. I can think of examples that I've experienced from both sides. I think sometimes the danger is if you've got a change team and say you've got a change director of change who isn't a change manager at heart, is in maybe they're more of a program director, that can kind of derail that change ethos almost. And I think then you tend to kind of go into a siloed work stream where everybody's kind of, heads down, not really talking to anybody else. But I think if you've got a leader of said change team that's really proactive in kind of brokering those relationships on behalf of the change team, that's where it really works. Somebody at the top advocating for that, getting you a seat at the table at these meetings you need to be at. Otherwise, the danger is, you just kind of stick in your swim lane, go around in circles, and then you put your head up 18 months later and don't know what's going on around you, which is a terrible place to be.
Right. Yeah, you've got mass chaos on your hands, and the wildfires have spread, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Julia? Anything you'd add to that?
No, I think, to be honest, I think Sarah's covered everything that I wanted to say there, really.
Yeah, that's a good response. I guess just to let me get one more comment here too before I move on to my next question. This is from Shanice on LinkedIn. Says, completely agree with Sarah. Change agents are vital to delivering successful change. So thank you for that feedback, Shanice, and I agree with both of you as well. So I guess just to sort of wrap this all up and to tie this all together, everything we've talked about so far, what sort of closing advice or tips do you have for organizations and project teams that are about to start either their change management initiative within an S/4HANA implementation, or they're just starting an S/4HANA journey? How do they get started? Because we've covered a lot of ground, right? There's a lot of stuff that can fall into change management. There's a lot of stuff that should fall into change management. What's the best way to get started to really give us something tangible that we can sort of springboard into our change program? Let's start with you, Julia.
I would say, first of all, okay, so there's two different models here. Is model number one, obviously the best option is to have a change manager there to do that work for you and to work with you. If that's not available, I would say if somebody else is doing that role, the key thing to do is to make sure that you understand the change. So very first thing up front, I would say, is do you have an agreed vision? Do you understand what everybody's getting at the end, something they can buy into, sell? So what's the selling point? Does everybody agree what that is? If not, get one, because your change, trying to sell that isn't going to be successful if no one knows what the box on the jigsaw looks like. Secondly, is it looking at your people? Is that change impact assessment? What processes, and I'm not saying it's easy, but which processes are, and again, you'll be working with potentially the business analyst to do this, but which processes are in scope, and how people are impacted in that. And that will help you understand, even if it's just, not saying just training, but if the only thing that you have the ability, budget, capability to do is training, at least then you're making sure that the right people get trained on the right things. That's the thing that I would say. But obviously, having a business change manager would do all of those things with their expertise and more, and cover all of those things, have those conversations with sponsors for you, understand resistance, and help you through that journey.
Right. How about you, Sarah? What would you add as far as getting started on the S/4HANA and or change management journey?
I think in addition to that, because obviously that's really important what Julie's just said, is, and this is a really simple one, but have a plan. So it goes for, if you've got a change team or a change manager, or maybe somebody else who's trying to do the change management journey for you because, resources, etc. Having a good, robust plan that you stick to. Obviously, things do change. I think it's really important. Quite a lot of the time, you've got your project plan in kind of, MS Project or whatever it is. It looks great, but change management sometimes just a tiny little swim lane in that. I think it's really important that you take that plan and actually build your own change management version, so things don't get missed, because it's so complicated and there's so many things you need to remember. Having it all written down and sort of presenting it back to the project team on a weekly basis just keeps you honest with it. And it gives people the chance to go, oh, maybe we've missed something, or have you thought about that? And kind of opens those conversations up. So yeah, really early on, get a plan together, and monitor it throughout. Don't just go, right, plan, done, tick, and never revisit it. It's kind of one of these live documents that you have to have throughout.
Yeah. Makes total sense. And I think along those lines too, one thing we've seen work, and I know the three of us have worked together, third stage on this too, is just doing that organizational readiness assessment up front to sort of a precursor to the change impact assessment that you talked about, that you both have talked about throughout this conversation. Change impact is once you get into the specific and more detailed process changes that are going to affect people. And that's typically, a bit down the path of implementation. But even before you start the implementation, doing an organizational readiness assessment to say, this is the culture, this is where the pockets of resistance are likely to be, and sort of trying to anticipate how big this change is going to be and how the organization is going to respond to it, so you can put together that plan that you guys talk about. That's something you could do right away, is organizational assessment leading to the overall plan and strategy that you're going to deploy as part of your implementation.
Yeah, I think that also helps you with risks as well, because therefore you can point out what the risks are. If there's a program raid or a project raid, those feed into that, and at least then that will help them get fed up to board level or to sponsor level, and they appear as they might have been missed off otherwise. But yes, that's absolutely important, absolutely essential.
And I'll add one more follow-up bonus question here. So what about, I'm an executive here. I'm an executive sponsor. I'm listening to this conversation. And I think, this all sounds great. Change management, I can see why it's important to most organizations. But our team is really excited about this change. I mean, we just picked S4HANA. We're just getting started on the project. And I'm looking around and everyone's pretty excited. So I don't think change is going to be a problem for us. But I get it, why it's important for everyone else. So what would you say to that executive that has that mindset, which we often see?
I think I'd say that it's very easy to be excited at the start of the project, but as time goes on and sort of, things come up that are unexpected, that might cause a bit more chaos than you anticipated, or people get change fatigue, all this kind of stuff. If you haven't got that kind of experienced change management person to help guide you through those situations, I think that excitement can quite quickly turn into resentment. And you kind of get these people who are getting really frustrated and go, oh, I'm done with this. So I think, yes, it's really good if your organization is very excited, but you've got to keep that momentum up. And in order to do that, I think you need a good change management strategy in place. Absolutely.
It's the expertise to be guided through that change by somebody that is an expert in that particular capability.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. And I agree with you both, and appreciate having you both here today. This is a great conversation. How can people can reach you? I assume on LinkedIn. Is that a good place? Is that the best place to connect with you both?
Absolutely. Yes,
absolutely.
So search Julia Joyce in Scotland and Sarah Stanley-Smith.
That's
in the UK. You'll find them both there. So be sure to follow them. Thank you, Julia and Sarah. A great conversation, and change management is such an important aspect of S4HANA implementations or any sort of digital transformation. So those are some really sound lessons and advice for those people going through S4HANA implementations. In fact, there's so many good points that were covered in that discussion. We're going to debrief and build on some of those points here in just a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Journey to S4HANA podcast. If you're going through an S4HANA implementation, you're looking for best practices and tips on how to make your project more successful, I encourage you to check out two resources that I made available to our listeners here on this podcast. First is our guide to a successful S4HANA implementation. It's a paper that I wrote based on all of our clients that have implemented S4HANA, some of the lessons we've learned, some of the best practices that we typically advise our clients to follow when going through their S4HANA implementation. So be sure to check that out. You can find that in the links below in this podcast. You can also scan the QR code right in front of you. The second thing you might want to check out is an online course that I've created. It's a course that's called the Deep Dive into SAP S4HANA Implementations. And in that 2.5-hour course, I get into all the basics of what SAP S4HANA is, what it takes to make the project more successful, how to manage change, how to handle the project planning, how to manage your system integrator, as well as some case studies from some of our clients and some of the lessons learned from some of our clients. So check out that training as well. So there's 2 things you could check out here, both in the links below. One is the guide to S4HANA implementations. The other is my S4HANA training course. So be sure to check it out. And our goal here is to help you be more successful in your transformation. So I hope you found this information useful, and we'll continue on with the show.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello and welcome back to the Journey to S4HANA podcast, Season 1, Episode 8. My name's Eric Kimberling here with Darian Fiakuski. And Darian, we just had Sarah and Julia from the Third Stage Consulting Europe team here to talk about some of their European clients that they've worked with on their S4HANA implementations and some of the global clients they've worked with on their S4HANA implementations and some of the change management challenges and lessons that they faced. What were some of your takeaways or questions from that conversation?
Yeah, I thought it was a great conversation. I think definitely a good switch up from what we have been talking about lately on the podcast. I know we've talked a lot about AI, so it's great to get into more of the human side of things and change management. So I really enjoyed that conversation. But one question I have from that is both Julia and Sarah emphasize the significance of understanding organizational culture and readiness for change. How do you personally advise clients to assess and address these aspects of change during ERP implementations, particularly when negotiating contracts or managing legal risks?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I mean, first of all, you have to recognize that there is a cultural shift that needs to happen, and the cultural shift usually takes longer than the S4HANA technology takes to get deployed. So when you come into a project and a system integrator or SAP tells you that they can implement in X amount of time that might take this long, you have to recognize that that's just to implement technology. When you add in all the other stuff that needs to happen, including the cultural change, that's usually going to elongate the project. And when you elongate the project as a result of the fact that you need to do all this other stuff that's not related to technology, it's not like those costs just now get spread out over a longer period. The costs that you're paying your system integrator and paying for the software, it adds up month by month. So you're paying at that same run rate. Now you're extending that run rate for longer. And so that's how projects get into trouble and why so many S4HANA implementations go over budget. So what you have to do is make sure that you have a realistic plan to begin with, that you take your proposal from your technical implementer or from SAP or whoever's your system integrator that's going to do the technical implementation. You take that proposal as a starting point, and then you add to it. You add all the other stuff that needs to happen. I know we also talked about, Julia and Sarah, the Activate methodology and some of the things that are missing from SAP's implementation methodology. And there's a lot of change management stuff that needs to happen to enable that cultural shift that is not included in that methodology. So you really have to create a more cohesive, integrated methodology that considers the SAP methodology as well as business transformation types of tools and approaches and strategies and methodologies. So to your point about how do you negotiate and manage legal risk, the best way to do that is to go in with realistic expectations and know that if SAP or one of the partners tells you that it's going to take X amount of time, you have to add a grain of salt or a dose of reality to that and determine what's the project really going to take, and then negotiate in the context of potentially a longer time frame. It also may mean that you defer when you buy all the subscriptions to the software. You may not need it on day one, because if you're just mobilizing a team, putting together a plan, why would you start paying for software you're not using yet? So that affects it or informs the negotiations as well. You want to push off as much of that cost as you can, because there's absolutely no value to you to have the software and to be paying those subscription fees. Even if they give you a big discount, it's probably not worth it to prematurely buy the software. So all that influences how you negotiate, how you contract, and some of the legal considerations as well. In fact, last week, if you didn't hear last week's episode, we spoke with Marcus Harris, who's an attorney at Taft Law, and he talked about some of the legal considerations with S4HANA contracts and implementation. So you might want to go back and check out that one as well if you want more information about some of the legal considerations for S4HANA implementations. But in general, those are the few things that I would keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually just going to say that too, Eric, that last week we had some great conversations about the legal side of it. So that was a great segue to this next question as well. Is throughout the discussion with Julia and Sarah, the importance of effective communication and training and change management were emphasized. What are some ways that companies do this? Like, how do they get their company ready for change? What are some specific ways, I guess you could say?
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, we had a guest on our sister podcast, which is called Transformation Ground Control. If you go to transformationgroundcontrol.com, you can find that podcast. But on that podcast, we had a guest back in March of 2024 named Friska Wiria, and she was on and she talked about the Future Fit organization, which is the name of a book that she just published. And she was on that podcast more from a general digital transformation perspective, not just focused on S4HANA. But in that podcast, her as a guest, she talked a lot about how to build a culture of change, an adaptable culture, and an adaptable, more nimble, more agile organization. But in general, the way you have to do it is, first of all, paint the picture of why it is we're changing, why we need to be more flexible, what flexibility and nimbleness means to us as an organization, and how S4HANA and our technology stack that we're deploying is going to help us get there. And so it's important to paint that vision of how and why, and certainly the vision of how the operating model is going to look going forward. So, I think the first thing is for people to understand the purpose behind the project and understand how it ties to overall goals and objectives, but more importantly, tie it down to me individually. What does it mean for me? What's in it for me? And how am I going to contribute? And how am I going to fit into this new culture that we're trying to create as an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of great things that we could learn from this conversation, or that I took away personally from this conversation. So lots of learning today. Yeah,
it's good stuff. And there's always, more we could have talked about with those two, and we'll, I'm sure, undoubtedly have them back on the show, perhaps next season on this podcast. But thanks to Julia and Sarah for being here, because it was a great conversation. And thank you to Darian for another great episode. Thank you to the audience for the great questions. Again, if you want to find more episodes of the show, you can go to journeytosforhana.com. All the past episodes, as well as upcoming episodes, are housed at that website on all the different platforms. So be sure to check it out there. You can also subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen or watch by going to journeytosforhana.com. And stick around, because next week we are going to feature Wayne Holtham on the show, and he's from Third Stage Consulting in Australia and Asia Pacific, and he's going to be on the show talking about S4HANA implementation failures. So we're going to be covering why projects fail and some of the lessons from S4HANA failures, and just some of the risks you need to be aware of. And the whole idea here in this next episode is to share some tips to navigate the risks. So stick around for that. We've got a lot of other guests that we're going to feature throughout this season as well. We'll have another case study from another client. We'll talk about how to choose the best system integrator. We'll talk about implementation planning as well. So we've got a lot of really important topics still yet to cover in this first season of Journey to S4HANA. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, an independent tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients through digital transformations. You can learn more about us at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also access all of our S4HANA resources and white papers and digital transformation white papers at that website, thirdstage-consulting.com. And the show is produced by Major Tom Productions. If you'd like to sponsor and feature your brand in this podcast, feel free to contact Major Tom via the contact information below. So hope you all enjoyed this episode. We'll look forward to seeing you next week on the Journey to S4HANA podcast. We'll see you soon. Take care.